Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming along. I'm Jeff Ford, and I'm Managing Director of Fox Networks Groups and also Senior Vice President of Europe and Africa for Content Development. Last year's Taskmaster, I had the shortest name and the longest title. That was the only thing I won at it, but there we are. Let's not talk about that. But the reason I'm here is because I'm chair of this year's International Committee for the festival. So, welcome to the Starz Gamechanger session, and we're featuring Carmi Zlotnik, President of Programming at Starz, and showrunner and writer Emma Frost. Carmi is responsible for programming and development activities for Starz, as well as overseeing production of Starz original series, including American Gods, Outlander, Power, Black Sails, The Girlfriend Experience, and The Missing, horror series Ash vs. Evil Dead, and comedy series Survivor's Remorse. Notably, to today's discussion, it was also across the limited series The White Princess and The White Queen, both with Emma Frost. Emma is an accomplished showrunner, creator, and feature film writer, working both in the UK and the US. Emma adapted and wrote Jamaica In for the BBC, has written episodes of The Tunnel, Man in the High Castle, and was lead writer on Shameless for 3 seasons. She's also a graduate of the Writers Guild of America, a prestigious showrunner program, and has a great deal of experience on working, obviously, both sides of the Atlantic. So before I go, I have to say thank you, and this session is brought to you by our partners, the British Film Commission and Creative Scotland, and many thanks to you for doing and for supporting this particular session. So please welcome, warmly, Carmi and Emma.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Before we go to the video clip that I brought, I just wanted to give you a little perspective in terms of setting this up. So, we've been working, since 2010 on a project called Starz. We started off with 17 million subscribers and a programming budget to do one show. Now we're at 24 and hunting for more, and we're at 10 shows, looking to expand our slate considerably in the next couple of years. So, what I'm going to show you is a little bit of a retrospective, focusing a little bit more on some of the more current things, but it'll show you a little bit of the tone, a little bit of the different subject matter, and a little bit of the attitude that we approach our programming with. And I'm really proud to be able to do this with Emma, that she agreed to do this. Just because, when I thought about coming here and what we could talk about and, talk about the different views that we have of the industry, I thought, this is a really important issue for us to be tackling, because we're both from very different perspectives on the forefront of a lot of crossover in terms of how shows get produced, what shows get produced, and I thought it would be valuable not just to have my perspective, but perspective of somebody that I really love working with and admire. So I appreciate Emma for doing this. But just to get things rolling, let's go to the clip, and then we'll have a little conversation afterwards.
Welcome, everyone. I'm going to kick off by asking Carmi just to talk a little bit about Starz programming strategy generally, and what kinds of ideas you're looking for.
Yeah, so I'm hoping this illustrates it, because I think the key to a program for us is these kind of combination of truth and spectacle. This is what I kind of use as my mantra and my guiding light, because truth is that it has to relate to the human condition, and spectacle is because I think it has to be larger than life. But spectacle, in the way that we define it, doesn't necessarily have to be, explosions. One actor on stage delivering a soliloquy with all the emotion and power that is possible, that can be spectacle in and of itself. So we feel like there's quite a range. And I think that when you look at that reel, or at least when I do, I think about the breadth of what we've accomplished and what we do, everything from Spartacus to Howard's End, and trying to build a brand that somehow can encompass all of those things. We've been focused very much on this idea of demographics. Our subscription business is really driven by this idea that what we want is differentiated and compelling, And we're constantly looking at the marketplace in order to determine that. So we've built slowly based on these, what I call swim lanes. You know, there's female, there's African American, there's genre programming, and each of those swim lanes represents a relationship that we have with a subscriber base. Now, each one of those things we need to keep going with because that's a relationship that we need to continue because churn is a big factor in our business. So, you know, we need to keep those subscribers engaged and make their subscription dollars worth something. You know, quality worth paying for is really, you know, at the end of the day, the goal. So the business is based on this growing of subscriptions, 17 million to 24 million. And when we're looking at, you know, any kind of pitch that comes in, what we're really thinking about is, are there subscribers in there? So.
And did those different lanes evolve over time, or were they something that was a conscious choice from the beginning?
You know, at the beginning, you know, I think this is something that, you know, Chris and I learned at HBO. Chris Albrecht was my boss for 20 years at HBO, is that you do the things that make sense, and when it works, you declare it strategy. So, you know, we started off, you know, with that one show of Spartacus, and we tried to think about things in terms of action, adventure, a little bit pulpy, not trying to be intellectual. And some things worked, some things not so well. I think the first thing that we really saw that worked and we got a reaction was White Queen. White Queen was a little show that we started off, we're going to make an investment. Yep. BBC had already been developing it. But when we put it on our air, all of a sudden, this female audience responded. And it was demonstrable. Yeah. You could tell that they really wanted to see a female-led story done from a female perspective, and that there was a dearth of that in the marketplace. And, you know, I think that, you know, this is the value of having, you know, responsive management and a relatively small team is, you know, we're not an aircraft carrier, we're a speedboat. So we changed course and said, oh, underserved audiences.
And before that, had that been something you identified? You thought perhaps the female audience is underserved in the cable space? Because I know at the time the White Queen went out, I think it got the highest ratings in the female audience for a cable show at that point. It before was Outlander. So absolutely,
and you know, it's just like looking at what the audience is telling you about what's working, and then doubling down on it. So, you know, White Queen leads directly to Outlander. Probably one of the easiest decisions we ever made.
Yeah, and was it a complete no-brainer just to say, okay, so there's a female audience coming to this, let's carry on, let's find other shows in that mold? Because I think it would probably be true to say in the UK, I don't think that level of reactivity is always followed through. So, I mean, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for us it was, you know, like data is a really hard thing to get in our business. We've got a lot more of it than we've ever had before, but this is one of the first times when you could see a lot of subscribers coming in as a result of a specific program.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a phenomenon that you know, as a subscription-based business, you've got to pay attention to. And we took the message more broadly is, if there is an underserved audience in women, what other underserved audiences are there? And how can we develop programming that would target those people?
Right. And so if somebody comes to you now with an idea that isn't in one of those clearly defined categories, is it something you would say, this isn't part of our brand, this isn't what we do? Or would you try to accommodate if there was something that you just really loved? I mean, how important is it to stick to that brand?
You know, I guess one of the things I've learned is strategy is as much about what you don't do as what you do. And staying very focused and staying rigorous, because sometimes there's programs that you like, sometimes there's programs that you want to see, but you've also got to meet that up with your responsibility to the business. So that's where targeting demographics, targeting, you know, pockets of subscribership, that is what's worked. And, we've had to navigate, this whole journey of growing the business on what I call an eat what you kill diet. So as long as we could grow the business, we could grow programming, because as we had more and more profits, we could put some of those profits into programming. And from the beginning, we were in a sales mode. So maintaining the profitability of the business was one of the chief priorities for us. So how do you both maintain profits and grow? There's other companies that, have a very different strategy and haven't had to do that. That was a requirement from the beginning. So finding those areas where we could find subscribers and starting, what I could think of as a snowball effect. As you get bigger, you start to be able to produce more shows. Yep. The brand starts to have more awareness. The brand starts to mean more things to more people. And eventually you get a business that's, I think where we're at now is we're super competitive.
Yeah. We're going to talk in a minute about co-productions, but I just want to ask you, while we're still on this subject, how important is it to you that shows have an underlying IP, that they're based on a novel or an article or a brand? I mean, I know there is a general tendency in American cable now for original ideas to be, well, they're quite hard to get away, and everyone kind of wants the security of having something already there with a fan base, or at least that people know. Does that feature in your thinking, or not really?
It does in terms of where there's potential subscribership. I mean, I think that's why, Outlander was one of those, kind of no-brainer decisions. 25 million people read that first book. It had a huge fan base. We heard the pitch, Ron Moore came in, a AAA level showrunner with a very high level IP. I went home, read the book overnight, and came back and told Chris, we got to make this. You could see why it had the following, and you could see why it would have a female following, that if they were fans of the book and we executed the show properly and showed proper respect for the fans, then we could convert those fans into subscribers. And I think that experience was one of the things that we point to that really caused us to rebrand the entire network and realign our thinking around this concept of fandom, of super serving that group. And, instead of just looking for big general audiences, looking for a white hot core of people that we could, target. And if we got those, that would be, and if you got only those people, that would be enough to justify that programming decision. But ideally, you were doing shows that were both targeted but inclusive, so that we could bring in a larger audience simultaneously. So that's been the goal. But a large IP, White Queen, White Princess, like the shows that you've worked on, Philippa Gregory has an enormous following. So that looks like an opportunity to us. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Outlander, Ash versus Evil Dead. But at the same time, I think we're completely open to new IP. Power was started with no
that's original.
IP.
Yeah.
It was just a pitch, from Courtney Kemp and Curtis Jackson coming in and talking about two big ideas. And we thought once you put those two big ideas together in a show, you'd really have something, which has turned out to be very powerful, pun intended, for
and
Starz.
huge figures, right? Power gets really big figures.
Power is the second biggest show in premium right now. It's blown up. It's kind of a phenomenon, but it's amazing. And even though it was the second biggest show, what we're seeing over the course, it's still broadcasting in the U.S. right now. It's growing even beyond what it achieved last season.
Yeah, amazing. Should we talk a bit about co-productions? Because obviously that's sort of where we came in about 6 years ago, I think, when we started working on The White Queen. And the genesis of that show has been that the first season, it was the BBC were in first. I think there were 3 scripts already written by the time Starz came in, and that was very much a co-production between the BBC and Starz. Then with The White Princess, it was just Starz and we did it in the American system where I was the showrunner. Can you talk a little bit about the different ways Starz co-produces with the UK or makes shows here? Obviously, some shows you fully own, some shows you just license. What your experience is of those different ways of working and what you prefer, if you prefer either one.
Yeah, actually, I like to have a very flexible approach to the business, and I like to think that we have no rules, and between co-productions, licensed shows, and in-house, that depending on the show and the timing, we're willing to make whatever deal that needs to be made for that specific situation. In building the programming slate, from that one show, one of the things we were looking to as the co-production market is how do we, fill out our programming slate and just add more things, try to mean more things to more people. So looking to the UK was a natural answer for us, and looking to people who, we felt were philosophically aligned, had some of the same ideas about quality, storytelling. Maybe we had different ideas about how we would execute on some of those shows, and we could talk about some of the interesting, topics that came up as a result. But when I read those first scripts, I think I read those first scripts, and I came over to London. Mm-hmm. It was the first time I met you, and everybody was saying, like, "What are the notes? What are your notes?" And I said, "I have no notes. These
I love
you could see that the scripts were, as far as I was concerned, ready to shoot, and you could see that they'd been through both a great writing process, but a development process, and you could probably speak more fluently about what that development process was on White Queen, but we seem to have a good common understanding of what we were trying to achieve dramatically. I had a lot of esteem for Ben Stevenson, mm-hmm. That he was there, felt very much philosophically aligned. When I got on the phone and started talking to him about, here's what we want to make, here's what you want to make. It seemed like there was that kind of philosophical alignment. And then, it was like meeting you and seeing the way that you were channeling Philippa's material, and dealing with some of the challenges of taking books and bringing them to life like that, I thought was really interesting. But I was, kind of buying into the entire team. And that was my, the first experience coming from the side of a U.S. broadcaster into a co-production.
But did it feel very different when we then did The White Princess? Or from your perspective, was there a difference? Maybe there wasn't, but I mean...
Yeah, White Princess was very different.
With two different sets of notes, so yeah.
Yeah, White Queen, we were, very conscious that we were the secondary network. Mm-hmm. Even though we were taking all the international rights on it, we were being very opportunistic. I thought, at that rate, let's buy as many rights to this show as we could get. But we were, I think, trying to be respectful. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that's kind of spells disaster for a co-production is when everybody tries to treat it like a tug of war and tries to get more than their fair share of creative say into it. Yeah. So we worked hard to consolidate our notes. Colin Calendar and Playground was a major part of that. So in order to keep the complexity down, Colin and I would always combine our notes so that when they were given to you and to company, they would be focused and sensible and on point, and we would keep them to a minimum. Mm-hmm. The way things...
there were challenges with things like casting, though. I mean, when you've got two different networks in two different countries, I mean, I remember the discussions we had on The White Queen, and there's sort of the BBC-approved list of, these are the people we'd love in these roles, and then obviously for you guys, some of the people you're like, well, I don't know who that is. They're very much a star in the UK. And then for the BBC, some of the names that I know we talked about felt too, I don't know, international or just, not familiar enough for their audience. So, I mean, do you feel there are distinct challenges with co-producing with a British broadcaster? Do you prefer when it is just Starz, or it's just they're different?
Yeah, I won't lie. I probably produced 95%, mm-hmm. Of the material that we've done over the course of my career, both at Starz and before that at HBO. So I love the direct control, and I think that's the reason to be both a network and a studio. Because I enjoy like the ability to get what you want, when you want it, at the price that you want it, and being able to, kind of hold the purse strings and either flow in resources when you think it's important or cut them off when you think that it's unwise. So it's always a little bit less comfortable working in that kind of partnership, but I'm also respectful of partnerships and wanting to make sure that, we engage with our partners in a fair and decent way. And I think this just permeates our company, is that, we try not to have any mandates. We try to be good partners. We try to be good listeners. So,
but do you have particular things you're looking for? I mean, if there is a show that is set in the UK, presumably, if you can, you would prefer Starz to fully finance and fully own that show. But if that's not the case, what would make you want to work with a partner here, a co-financing partner? I mean, are there benefits to it as well, or is it just you feel the creative then gets pulled in different directions?
I think the benefits are economic, is filling out our slate with additional programming and being able to do that at a price. So that's a continuing effort, and since I manage the entire budget of programming, that's a slot that we continually have, for doing co-productions or acquisitions out of the UK market. Since we've been acquired by Lionsgate, there's even more of an emphasis on ownership. So I can be just, kind of straight up about the idea that, that's going to be a continuing push. We want to have distribution rights. We want to have control of as many shows as possible, because one of the things that Lionsgate looks for Starz to do is be a content pump into their distribution business.
And it's interesting that Starz particularly seems to make a lot of shows in the UK, or co-produce shows in the UK. And the other way round, it wouldn't work. I mean, there is a perception that a British audience wants something that is at least set somewhere that they're familiar with. That's changing slowly, but what is it you think an American audience engages with in shows set in the UK? I mean, do you have a filter for that in terms of asking yourself, why will this particular story work for our audience back home? Or do you just think it doesn't matter if it's a good story, it will connect on a human level?
Yeah, I mean, I think the human level is the most important, but there are things that we're aware of. History is very much a part of your culture in the UK in a way that it's not in the United States. So having to remind people, like even asking for characters' full names to be called out, so that people can track who they are and what their relationships are. Which
was a nightmare on the White Queen, because everyone's got the same names.
Yeah, so it's something that you wouldn't have to do as much, for if you were just making it for the UK, but for the US audience, we're very well aware that they need those kind of helping hand moments to, okay, I understand who these people are and why this is significant. There's also, clearly there's content issues. There's a different way that, that we look at producing content. We're a premium channel, and I think that means people expect a certain kind of unadulterated type of programming. Our service is programmed for adults, and so where there's specific situations, we think that, sexuality should be embraced because it informs character and drives story. And there's no reason why we shouldn't, delve into that, because it's part of the human experience. But we also try to think about, how to bring in action, and a kind of visual spectacle, because that's also, important in terms of production value. And I think, like in our experience with The White Queen, and, I'm sure everybody in this room is aware, the White Queen worked a lot better for the US, I think, than it worked in the UK. And I think it got hung up on some issues of, whether there were zippers in the wardrobe, or, or there were banisters or things like that. And that's one of those areas where, like being able to flow in the resources and make sure that, like those issues don't detract from the suspension of disbelief so that people could really be engaged for the story for what it was, a great story. But when you don't render the world perfectly, people's eyes are so adept at catching those little details and nuances. So when you talk about like the difference between what we did with White Queen and then White Princess, we were able to go back through and say, okay, here's the way we want the wardrobe handled. Here's the way we want the scenic handled. And I think and we spent a little bit more money in those areas in order to ensure that we got what we wanted. And I think the finished product shows, as a result.
Yeah, definitely. Can you talk a little bit about pitching? So when you get pitches from UK writers or producers, what's a good pitch? What's a bad pitch? What should they come to you with?
I think the key thing for people who are pitching to us is to understand our brand and where we sit in the marketplace and how we compete by doing things differently than what everybody else is doing, and how we try to, even if, we have this wide range of programming that we try to encompass, that there's still an attitude about the way that we execute on it and the things that we're looking for, because we realize that being one of the smaller entities, one of the smaller businesses, we've got to cut through this cacophony of everything else that's out there. So a clear, pure idea, I'm a big believer in themes around a story. Like there's a reason why this story is being told by these people and at this time, and why is this important, is because I think that those themes become the story engines that drive series. And when a person's coming in, I'm looking for that kind of clear idea, but I'm also looking for the ability to execute, right? And so I'm trying to size the people up, who are in the room and say, is this person a showrunner? Does this production team have the experience to accomplish the thing that they're talking about doing?
You would expect very much in a pitch then that the creator, the writer, would be driving that pitch, would be in the room, or at least be part of that pitch, rather than...
It's paramount for us.
Yeah.
So just to be clear about our thoughts about showrunning.
Yeah. We've had lots of conversations about showrunning, yeah.
The showrunner to us is the lens that we see a project through. We try to work in other modes, but that is our default setting, where a clear idea rendered through that person's perspective is the beginnings of a show.
Mm-hmm. Because also then you know where the creative responsibility lies and ultimately who is delivering that vision for you. Even though there'll be a lot of other people as part of the team, it's a system where you understand one person is driving through the creative from inception to delivery and on into press and marketing materials as well.
Well, okay, so you've been through this before
yes,
with
I
us.
Have.
You tell me, what's it like coming in and being a showrunner for us?
It's challenging. The first time you do it, it's very. It's an interesting transition from the British system, and I was very grateful that I'd done the WGA showrunner training program. And I think when I did that program, what I thought was, I will build on this foundation that I already have. And I'd worked in development, I'd been a script editor, I'd worked in production before I was a writer, so I knew I had certain transferable skills. The reality was, and it really shocked me, I had to leave at the door everything I'd learned in the UK. And the reason for that is when you actually do the showrunner program, you recognize that the skills you've learned in the UK to survive as a writer are the opposite skills to the skills you need to survive as a showrunner. And in the UK, it is all about, you don't want to be branded difficult, you don't want to overstep your mark, you have to there is a very clear hierarchy and the writer is not the top of the heap. And if you start acting like you think you're in charge, nobody wants to work with you, and you get into all sorts of problems to try and evolve your career. So unconsciously, you learn all these kind of slightly odd devices about, you know, you allow everyone else to think it's their idea, you're slightly too humble, you try to accommodate a lot. And what's interesting about showrunning, and the first tenet, and everybody, I mean, I was lucky enough to be taught by Sean Ryan, Carlton Cuse, Marty Knox, and John Wells. I mean, this huge array of amazing showrunners. And every single one of them says, get comfortable with power. You have to wear the mantle of it. And if you don't actually make those decisions, someone else will take it from you, because everyone gets nervous and everyone goes, all right, you're not sure enough of your vision. And if you're not sure, we better all come in and help you. And before you know it, you're not the showrunner, because everyone takes it away from you. So there is this really odd psychological flip, I think, that has to happen if you're coming from the UK process, where you have to go, okay, no more Mr. Nice Guy. Everything I used to know has to go away. And now it's like, okay, this is what we're doing. And that doesn't mean that you become a dictator. The trick really with showrunning is, and again, I'm really grateful I did the WGA program, because I think before I kind of thought you have to know everything and be everything because the job is so big. But what I learned doing the showrunner program is every showrunner is different, and you cut your cloth according to your own skills and talents and your own particular interests. And everybody, as a showrunner, it is your responsibility first and foremost to deliver quality scripts on time. That doesn't mean you're in the room all the time. You can have a very good second who does it in your absence while you're making other decisions. Ultimately, the whole creative, you're the fulcrum for everything. You are the creative lens. But you don't have to know everything. And what's really interesting to me is I thought showrunners were on set the whole time before I did the WGA training program, because you just think I've got to sort of be everywhere and do everything. And again, it's so interesting how few showrunners go on set. And John Wells will say your only role on set is as a cheerleader. Because if you've hired correctly and the scripts are good enough and you trust your director and you trust your team, then by the time it's in production, you're in the way. I mean, focus on getting the next scripts out and post, because then, of course, the retelling of the story the other end is when all the material comes back, and you've got to make sure that it represents the story you were trying to tell. So it's an incredibly interesting process. And I mean, for me, there's no going back. I mean, working as a showrunner, it feels like what I should be doing and what I want to be doing, but also it does make you realize how the UK system is a very odd system. And I know we make some great drama, and we really, really do, but I think when you step outside of it and you actually think about how writers are so divorced from the process of production and most of those creative decisions, it's really uncomfortable. And you spend any time in America and everyone's like, why? You know, why don't writers just say they want to have those roles? And you kind of go, well, I don't know, because we've all got Stockholm Syndrome, I think. I mean, you know, what other reason could there possibly be? And I mean, out of interest, are there any writers? One? Okay.
Two.
Two? Is there another hand? Okay, so, you know, this is...
Three? Small hand.
And everybody else is broadly what I would term a note giver, as in a script editor, development person, or producer. Pretty much.
Guilty.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, it's interesting. We're at the TV festival. Where are the writers? You know, and okay, people have to pay to come. I get that, and you know, writers aren't. You know, it's up to them to pay and to be part of this. But writers don't feel part of this conversation, and I think that's a problem. So, I'm an advocate.
I think the other thing, just to amplify on what you're saying, is, you know, when you talk about the nervousness about it, there is a kind of nervousness and anxiety in the US on the studio side.
Yep.
If you don't have that person who's taking control, and what you're looking for is, I guess, this combination of experience and credibility, because when somebody has that, you know, everybody can be calm and just kind of sit back and go like, okay, I'm in the hands of a storyteller. I'm in the hands of somebody who knows how to execute on their vision. You know, like, we don't have to be, you know, hands-on. We don't have to be micromanaging. And that's really, you know, and I think about the most fulfilling experiences, like that's what it is when somebody else is telling you the story and you can put your trust in them that they know how to do it and they can execute on it. So I think having a strong hand is having a strong vision, you know, instead of, you know, having Stockholm Syndrome, you know, like I really believe, like, you know, writers are the gods of their world, and
Yep.
they have a manifest destiny to take on this bigger role as we get into, you know, like a bigger and bigger world of scripted drama in the world.
And I mean, also, there are countless examples I can think of why it was important that I was in that role on The White Princess. But I mean, as one example, there was a scene that I had written that involved Margaret Beaufort and a gravestone or a tomb for her father. And the choices that the producer was going to go with, and that's fine, that was to the best of his understanding and ability, but he was either going to cut the scene because we couldn't afford it. Basically, it turned out what I'd written I thought was not massively complicated was actually very complex and quite expensive in the location we were using. And so his solution was cut it completely. So there would have been a hole in the story. But because I was part of that conversation, I sat down with Will Hughes-Jones, our fantastic production designer, and I said, this is what I'm trying to achieve. This is what the point of the scene is, and it's a small but essential part of this narrative for Margaret Beaufort. And we worked out something that was incredibly cheap, that did exactly the same job, and that was actually really inventive. And there were countless moments where that happened. And I think as a British writer turned showrunner, what that makes you realise is how many times in the shows that you write and you watch the dailies and you go, why have they done that and not this thing that was important? And it's because you're not in the bloody conversation. And there are so many times where a writer can come up with a creative solution. And I mean, even in terms of a giant battle or something, you suddenly go, it's not about the battle, it's about focusing on the rose or this particular thing that somebody passes to someone else. And as a writer, you can totally rethink the way that you envisage that piece of narrative. But if you're not part of that conversation, you're spending money pointlessly as well, because insane things get taken literally. And nobody says this one, you know, these 2 words in this sentence is going to cost, you know, $100,000, because they go, it's written down, so we better do this thing. So, I mean, that's a really good example as well of why the writer has to be right in the center of that, because otherwise the money isn't even being spent sensibly. So,
So what was the most difficult part of your transition from writer to showrunner?
Being accepted. The UK, I hope it will change, but there is a real resistance to showrunners. The power at the moment is in the hands of producers. I think directors don't want writers to be showrunners. I think the crew just don't know who the hell you are. You know, why are you even here? So I think you have to earn your credibility. And I think the hardest thing is toughing that out, actually, because I'm very clear what I know and I'm very clear what I don't know. And when you enter into an aspect of the production where you're on shaky ground, it's not your area of expertise, it is so easy for somebody to undermine you. And what I found was people tried to. And not everyone, we had a great crew and a great cast. I mean, it was a really happy production. But you're aware of it in a slightly insidious way. Oh, you know, we're not used to a writer being in this conversation. We're not used to, you know, do you actually know anything about this, Emma? You know, you do get that kind of stuff. So I think the hardest thing is genuinely acceptance. Also in the UK, overwriting other writers' scripts it's becoming more common, would you guys say? But I mean, it's still not where we've come in from. So our system is one where you give a writer notes and then they do the next draft. You never actually interfere with their script yourself. And I think that's really hard because writers kind of feel, well, Emma, you know, you came up through the industry without being overwritten. You got notes and got to have just your name and your voice on the page. Why are you overwriting me? But it's a part of the showrunner system. It's part of keeping that voice consistent. And frankly, it is quicker and cheaper in the end to do it yourself if it isn't part of the voice of the show. And that was something I really struggled with because I didn't want to overwrite people. I said at the beginning, I hope I won't. And then cue 8 episodes later, I think there were 2 I didn't touch. So,
yeah, on the flip side, from a network and a studio mentality, we're saying, like, if a script hasn't gone through the showrunner's typewriter, you know, we probably don't want to see it. So the expectation is that the last pass on every script before it comes to us is going to go through the showrunner.
Yep. And that's actually incredibly useful from my side, because ultimately that's what I had to tell people, that that is the expectation, and you know, there is a quality control, and whether or not, I'm not even necessarily saying what I'm doing is better than what they've done, it's just this is the voice of the show, and that voice is filtered through me, and that's what, as you say, the network's expectation is. So, but yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges with it, and also my strategy was, if there was a problem and it was something I didn't know how to solve myself, was just to get everybody in the room together and bang their heads and say, you explain to me what the problem is to that person who says they can't do this, and you just have to get everybody in and make them be responsible and accountable to each other and tell each other why they can't solve the thing, because all of a sudden they go, well, no, I didn't quite mean that. And so you finally get the solution, but it is about managing, and I think a huge part of the role is that managerial role of just actually toughing up when you don't know stuff and just saying, all right, everybody in here now, you all talk and tell me how we solve this.
But isn't part of this, you know, at least from what I see, is like a redefining of relationships across the board, you know, of what constitutes producing, what constitutes writing, and within that show running, and then, you know, with directors, because, you know, in our system in the US, directors are guests. So you can't depend on the director to understand, you know, the totality of the arc of how does this character link up in an overall plan that's going to take many episodes and many seasons potentially to execute. Well, the showrunner's got that in mind, you know, like, you know, on Power, Courtney already has an idea of how the series ends.
And a lot of showrunners actually direct sometimes as well.
Yeah, and well, and you know what? I encourage them all to do that, because I think that is an incredibly valuable experience. Because once you've sat in that chair, like that is a little bit different chair about all the specificity of how everything, you know, from the page gets translated to the set. So do you plan on directing?
No.
You want to try?
No, I do not. But most of the projects...
I'm going to work on you on that. I'm going to try to convince you.
I used to want to. It's funny, like, show running is the itch I needed to scratch. I don't want to direct. But as you know, all the TV shows I'm developing moving forward is with Matthew Graham. And Matthew wants to direct. So Matthew can go off and direct, and I'll do the...
direct his thing. I still think it's a valuable experience. You know, from the beginning of Power, I've been encouraging Courtney Kemp. I said, you know, like, at some point, you got to direct, you know, and you know, I'm proud of Emma, I'm proud of Courtney, you know, in the fact that, you know, she's had to do, you know, all of her training, you know, in terms of becoming a showrunner, you know, as a show was up and going. So, I mean, she was just kind of thrust into that position. You know, at the beginning, we were able to put a couple of people around her in order to help her. But after the second season, I said, I'm pulling off the training wheels. You're fully capable to do this yourself.
Courtney said one of the best things about show running as a woman. She said, don't say no, because most of your crew will be men, and the last time they heard a woman say no to them, it was their mother. You do not want to be thought of as their mother, because then you'll have a bunch of recalcitrant teenagers. So you have to find a different strategy.
Interesting perspective. Look, I think you do have to say no. I think you have to.
Yeah, but what she meant was just don't use the actual word. Find a different way to basically express that's a negative, but without sort of assuming I told you not to. So it was interesting.
Yeah, I think you need to actually say the word no. I think people, you know, need to hear it, people need to say it, and I think that people need to get used to wielding the power that is in, you know, saying no and knowing, you know, something that I learned early on. Your yes has to mean yes, and your no has to mean no.
Yeah.
Right? So you know, in order to make the decision stick, you know, you've got to go into it with a certain amount of bravery. You know, and be intrepid, and know, and this is what I learned when I was producing, you're going to make a certain amount of decisions. Most of them are going to be good. Hopefully, few of them will be bad. A lot of them will be in between. But part of the process is you just got to keep making decisions, and you got to learn from them.
And also, as a showrunner, you'll be held accountable for every single decision that's made on the show anyway. So they may as well be your bad decision as anybody else's at the end of it.
Yeah, you realize. Yeah, and that's what, you know, I think our system is driven by that kind of accountability.
Yeah.
You know, because there's one person that you want to be able to pick up the phone and say, well, how do we address this, or what's going on, or why are we over budget, or how do we get back on budget? And and that's again where I think the writer is invaluable, because if I say like this scene needs to be rewritten because we need to deal with the economics. Like there's nobody else who's placed close enough to be able to accomplish that.
Yep, although interestingly in the UK system oftentimes the producer would drive that and say we have to cut this. I mean, I've had that experience myself where things are just, I don't have a say in it. Things are just taken away and there's a hole in the story. So there's a very different perspective. We're going to take questions in a minute if anyone's got questions, but Carmi, I know we wanted to talk briefly about women in leadership roles in the Starz universe, and a little bit about diversity, which is a big conversation in the festival as well.
Yeah, so when we describe this kind of swim lane attitude of women, African Americans, genre, the coming swim lanes for me look like Latino, LGBTQ, Middle America, audiences that I feel like there's subscribership in. And I operate from this model that I call blind spots, which is I have blind spots, you have blind spots, everybody has blind spots. Our job as managers and executives is to make sure our blind spots don't get replicated. So that's really the driving force of why we feel diversity, not only in our company, in our storytelling, in our executive ranks, in our casting, across the board is an imperative, because we want to appeal to the most amount of people. We want authenticity. So, like diversity is important. I think part of that is how do we prime the pump so that there is a more diverse industry with talented people that you can call on for these roles. And that's why, people like you, people like Courtney, finding very capable women who can then step up to that sense of responsibility and become the showrunners. The directors that we find, we've got we call it an orientation process, because when we talk to people from women in film, they said, there's this thing called shadowing, but shadowing is kind of bullshit because people shadow all the time and they never get jobs. Right. So we said, well, we're going to take a different approach. We're going to hire people for the job. We're going to send them to the show. They're going to sit there for a couple of episodes. They're going to get familiar with the crew, the cast. They're going to see the rhythms of the show. And they're going to be oriented so that by the time their episode comes up, they'll be in a position for success. So that's us investing in their success. And I've got a number of examples like Victoria Mahoney and Geeta Patel, who've gone on from that experience. Now they've done actually so well, we can't get them back to do our show. They're in such high demand, but those are good problems to have.
Yeah. And out of interest, when you do that, is that the couple of episodes that they sit in on, they do that because they want to learn and they accept that they're not being paid for those? Or do you get into battles with the DGA about, well, you're taking this person out of play for months?
Shadowing, people don't get paid for. What we do is we pay them a stipend, we fly them out, we put them in a hotel, and we do that for, I sent a couple of directors. I'd seen a short film that these two brothers had shot in Mexico, and we sent them down to New Zealand for almost a month.
Amazing.
To shadow on Ash vs. Evil Dead, because I thought these guys are going to be up-and-coming horror directors. And, I think Rob Tappert, who was the producer on the show, was a little resistant. He's like, who are these kids that you're sending down here? But now, after the entire process and after he's seen their episodes, he's a believer. He's going to hire them for a feature at some point.
Oh my God, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's, I think, just investing in people, investing in success, and ultimately investing in our industry. Should we take questions?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I think someone's got a microphone. Hold on.
Thank you. My question is, looking at how the UK linear TV market seems to be in terminal decline with smaller and smaller audiences, Has Starz got any plans to launch a pay platform or a paid channel in the UK?
No specific plans right now, but we do have our relationship with Liberty Global. And so, like a project like The Rook comes together because, it's Lionsgate, it's Starz, it's Liberty Global for distribution rights. So, I think we try to partner within our related companies, but there's no specific plans right now. Although eventually, I think once we've got a bigger programming library and a bigger programming brand, international is the next step. Yes, young lady.
Hi, Carmi. Minori from Broadcast Magazine. I was actually wondering why Peep Show didn't pan out for Starz, and whether that points to perhaps certain British ideas and concepts that don't perhaps translate necessarily, and also what does that mean for sort of the half-hour comedy space for your channel?
Yeah, I don't think Peep Show not going into production was an indictment on Peep Show or the development. I think we've got some great scripts and it was a great idea. I think it's just more, of a strategic conversation that we have to have, where all programs in development have to compete against all the other programs because each one of them is an opportunity. And so, I don't know, there's a specific show that, kind of went in front of Peep Show, but, it's one of those shows that, hopefully that there's a time and a place, that it works for either us or from a US network, because I think it's a great concept. But I think for the time being, dramas have really been working better for us. It's not to say that a half hour couldn't be a massive subscriber acquisition program, but so far that's not what we've been seeing. So right now and this is the way that Survivor's Remorse, one of our half-hour comedies, is airing right now, is last year it aired with season 3 of Power and got its entire lead in. This year, we've overlapped them only for 3 episodes. So we're seeing Power more as a subscriber acquisition vehicle, and Survivor's Remorse, a half-hour comedy, as a retention vehicle. So retention is one of those kind of evolutions of our strategy, which has also pushed us into unscripted programming, because we're thinking about the programming retention as programming at a price point that does a job relative to the other programs on the service. Does that answer the question?
Sure, yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah, we can take that.
Just like to ask a question about the Lionsgate Starz deal, and perhaps look at the opportunities and challenges for you in that deal. Perhaps, particularly, you mentioned you like to have full control, and in those deals like The Rook, where it's Lionsgate and yourself and Liberty Global, how that comes together, and how opportunities and challenges.
Yeah, I think it's more opportunities than challenges. I think we're the lead broadcaster in The Rook, and so that's a place where we're very comfortable leading the conversation. The fact that within our own kind of internal corporate system and kind of satellite companies, that there's a way to finance programming is something that we wanted to take advantage of. I think the opportunities are great. One is, it already paid a lot of dividends for us, is just the institutional knowledge. I think that you have a different view of the industry when you're at a studio. The networks are looking at a lot of material, but it's very narrow in terms of what people are coming in to pitch us. But the studios and the agencies, because they deal with everybody, they kind of see a wider landscape, and they understand in terms of deal making some of the potential innovations, practices, what people are doing, what they're not doing. So tapping into a very smart business affairs group at Lionsgate has been very, very helpful for us. I think the other thing that's been really helpful is as we've been developing unscripted, I've been tasking drama executives for the most part to learn new skills and get into a new programming area. So being able to call Jen O'Connell, who runs the unscripted group at Lionsgate, and talk to her about standards, practices, producers, fees, things like that, it's also been very, very helpful. And and just having an ongoing conversation with Kevin Beggs and the TV group. They're tremendously intelligent. I'd say one of the challenges is we look at all their development, because what we want to make sure is there isn't something that comes out of their development that doesn't go to some other service first that would have worked for Starz. So we look at a lot. We can't do a lot, but looking at what they're developing and understanding what they think the other potential competitors are doing, like that's valuable information for us.
Mm-hmm. I think we've got 1 minute left. Does anybody have a... Yeah, so we've got, come with the microphone.
Nina?
Hello, my name's... Sorry,
Oh. Sorry.
Sorry. My name's Julie Craig from the Film Office for Fife Tayside. I just wanted to say a huge thank you for all the investment in our region in particular that Starz has made for Outlander. We've had huge benefits from the show coming. And just on the point of view of talent development, it would be, we tend to find people are understandably sworn to secrecy about their experiences, but given that they're working on a showrunner-led show, it would be really wonderful if consideration could be given to some people being allowed to talk about their experience working on a showrunner type experience. It might help start to change things in the UK also. Just food for thought.
Can you rephrase that? I'm not sure I completely grasp that.
We tend to find that people, understandably, who are working on Outlander, are everything from locations to crew, are completely sworn to secrecy. We're a film office. We treat everything in strictest confidence, obviously. But it would be, from the point of view of changing the culture in the UK...
But you mean about the specific narrative within the show?
No, not to do with the specific narrative in the show, just the experience of working on a showrunner-led show, because obviously an awful lot of production in the UK is not led by showrunners. I don't know why
they would be sworn to secrecy or have that perception. I mean, obviously they can't talk about the storylines, but beyond that,
We tend to find that they don't really want to talk about, I was third grip or anything. They just
on the one hand, I admire that you've been able to put the cone of silence over everything.
It's not a criticism.
I'm actually impressed, but yeah, I think there's a way to flow more information, about showrunners and how we operate and.
Would be really appreciated.
I think Ron Moore is really the key. I mean, he is a fantastically experienced showrunner that I think has a lot of knowledge and ability, and
no, he's
we should reach
excellent.
out to him.
And Ron has done many interviews and talked about his experience of Scotland. It's so fantastic and so hugely appreciated. Just a suggestion that if maybe more people across the...
Okay,
sorry,
see
didn't
me
mean to
afterwards.
take up too much time.
We'll see what we can do.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we are out of time, so thank you, Carmi.
Thank you, Emma. It was a pleasure.